Yeah, the title differs a little from that which Jerry had on his title slide, and it seems to have turned into The Rise of the Guidepost and its recording by the Ordnance Survey.
Much better.
Yes. Right. Now, guidepost is the Ordnance Survey term, or so it means fairly standard since about 1851. What a lot of us call a signpost, of which an example is seen here on the title slide, which unfortunately disappeared very shortly after I photographed it in 1984. It's worth keeping in mind because of its distinctly vintage lettering, and I will come back to it later. There's a rather better known one, which as far as I'm aware is still happily there, is this one in Kirby Stephen, which is unusual in having distances in miles and furlongs. I suspect from the style of it, it's very late 19th or even early 20th century, with cast iron, and it's evidently a notable thing because it's features on postcards which you can buy in the neighbourhood, or at a rate which you could buy about 15 years ago. Here are two generations of showing guideposts on OS 6-inch maps, which have been the main focus of my study recently. And one of them is the first edition sheet covering the Croydon area, which the survey of which dates from about 1868 or so. You will see from the four arrowed examples that guidepost is spelt out in full, whereas on the extract from the 6-inch map on the right, which in fact is one of the special emergency editions of 1938, which I happen to have a scan of, you'll see it's been abbreviated to GP. And indeed, GP was coming in the later stages of the survey for the first edition, 2500 and 6-inch in the later 1880s, and it was completely standard on the revision from about 1893 onwards. Now, I investigated, I started investigating this as a result of some remarks by Steve Chilton and Ivan Shepherd in their draft work on the OS 6-inch map, which is slowly grinding away, and I hope will appear in some form within the next 12 months or so. They had remarked that on the first edition survey in Lancashire in the 1840s, various phrases were used, including signpost and direction post, finger post, as well as guidepost. As I say, by 1851 or so, guidepost is standardized, and I started looking for it on various 6-inch first edition maps, which I happen to have either originals or copies of in my own collection. On the left is the Plymouth area, which was the subject of survey in various stages between about 1857 and 1863. And on the right is a section of East Surrey, from Croydon southwards, which was being surveyed about a decade later. You'll observe, particularly on the Plymouth map, there is a very strong concentration of these things in parishes. And it's also to some extent apparent on the Surrey one. There are quite a number in Croydon and occasional ones in others, but other parishes are completely devoid of them. So this raised the question of whether the OS was showing these things erratically, or whether showing them by parish like this indeed represented the situation on the ground. I investigated various areas. 3 of them were in East Scotland, and the slide here is not actually a joke, although it may look like one. There's area of East Fife, and towards the end of the talk, I'll come back to the reason for East Fife. There is West Haddingtonshire, lastly known as East Lothian, and East Berwickshire. Now, I must admit that some of the reasons for doing this is I didn't have any original 6-inch maps of these areas. I did have original 1-inch maps, which could be scanned and formed useful bases for plotting the incidence of these things. As you see, the work in East Fife and West Haddingtonshire was really very light, because there simply weren't any guideposts at all shown when these were being surveyed at the 6-inch scale in the early 1850s. Berwickshire came a little later, after the 1:500 scale had been adopted, and I had a memory of having seen a guidepost with distances on one of the 1:500 first edition maps of about 1856 or so, 1856-57, in the British Library in the mid-1980s, and it's if the here we are. The pointer is it's the right-hand one, which the pointer is pointing to, which rather perversely doesn't appear on the 6-inch map, though the one to the left does. This set me to work going through the scans of the 1:500 on the National Library of Scotland website to see if in practice there were rather more guideposts in East Berwickshire in around 1856 or so, but it failed to produce any more in the experimental area, which roughly corresponds to the scan, scan from rather later mapping, which is up on the screen. This didn't necessarily answer the question of whether somehow the OS were mapping it erratically, though this is a nearly contemporary mapping in the East Riding of Yorkshire, and each dot shows the guidepost, and you'll notice that generally it's quite well supplied, except for the extreme south of the area, south of Roos and Withensea, where there's hardly any of them. The area I selected was determined by 6-inch sheets, and so the reason why there are apparently none in the northwest around Market Weighton is simply I didn't have any 6-inch sheets covering this area, and therefore didn't investigate it. Whereas I do have mainly photocopies of the first edition 6-inch of the area covered with red dots, and I then went on to look at the National Library of Scotland's holdings online. So as you can see, Yorkshire is southeast Yorkshire is very well supplied with these, and my inference is that in practice there were very few of them to be shown, and it's partly down to this gentleman, who some of you will recognise as Sir Henry James, the director of the survey from 1854 to 1875. Before he had his big promotion in July 1854, James was the divisional officer in latter Parliament regional director of the survey based in Edinburgh, and was controlling the survey of, amongst other areas, Fife and Haddington. So any inclusion or exclusion of guideposts in those areas took place on his watch. Better still, in 1870-71, the Ordnance Survey was investigated by a departmental committee of the Office of Works, which had just taken over responsibility for it. And James defended the showing of extreme minor detail on the 1:500 on the basis that it was considerably easier for his surveyors simply to record everything rather than give them discretion about what they did. And there was implications, if you gave them discretion, you'd have to pay them more and train them more. So this, some of you may regard as a bit flimsy, but that encourages me to think that the lack of guideposts on OS mapping of eastern Scotland of the early 1850s actually reflects the situation on the ground. And I did look on a few sheets in Forfarshire of a few years later, and they do show a few guideposts. There's certainly not very many. So Now, the 1-inch maps which I annotated using in manuscript and then using scans were annotated with a series of symbols which I think are fairly straightforward, marking road junctions in black and arrows pointing in various directions according to whether they're on the county series first, second, third or fourth edition. Of course, quite a lot of areas were never covered other than the second edition in the county series. But the symbol at the bottom shows what can be used as a combined symbol. This is the result. This is part of the Surrey area, and which was unusual in practically the whole area of about 83 square miles, whatever that is in square kilometres, was practically the whole area except for a couple of quarter sheets was exceptionally revised in both surveyed and revised in first, third and fourth editions. And so we have quite a number of arrows pointing left, which indicates fourth edition cover. Very few arrows pointing upright. There's one, recover the pointer, here we are, towards the top here at Worms Heath, which indicates there was a post there on the first edition, but no other first edition posts are indicated, whereas there are quite a number of second edition ones and third and fourth, indicating certainly there is a growth in the number of guideposts. Now, one of the advantages of the 1-2 506-inch first edition, which should in theory show the same landscape, is that they straddle the year 1888-89, which is when county councils are created, and county councils largely take over the responsibility for roads and for erecting guideposts and the like. So one has a sort of certainly a snap impression of what happens before, what the situation is a bit before 1888 and somewhat after. In the case of East Surrey here, the original survey date is around 1868 or so, with revision around 1895. So it's comfortably either side of the divide between pre-county council and post-county council. And as I noted from an earlier map which I had up here, there was a certain tendency in Surrey originally for guideposts to group themselves by parish, but this is very much diluted here, and they can be seen to be fairly widely spread, though once you get away from the ex-turnpike road here, the one with the emphasised sides and the mileages, the guideposts tend to fall off, particularly in the northeast part of the map where I'm pushing the cursor around. So having produced these maps, I then calculated the proportions of the proportions of guideposts shown on variously on first edition and later maps, and plotted them on a graph with various symbols. Unfortunately, at least where I'm viewing it here, the top has been slightly truncated, but it should show upward tendency and a considerable down here in blue are the various Scottish counties and also the southwest of England. In the middle are a Bedfordshire-Hertfordshire line, which I'm pointing to, and lines for Lincolnshire and southeast of Yorkshire, and the northeast Lincolnshire one is this one right outside here. Down here is one in East Devon rather than around Plymouth, and East Devon I'll come back to in a little while. It's evident that there's rather more guideposts being shown fairly consistently in these counties here: Bedfordshire, East Devon, Lincolnshire, South East Yorkshire, than there are elsewhere. And I'm led to think that guideposts of this sort are something of a lowland phenomenon, And they continue to be something of a lowland phenomenon, rather interestingly, even after 1888, when the highway authorities come along, and particularly in southeast Scotland, start erecting guideposts in modest quantity. A predecessor to guidepost is the guide stone, and here is an example west of Sheffield, which I photographed about 20 years ago, and the depiction of it on the first edition 6-inch and the second edition 6-inch, where you'll notice that although the stone itself probably remained unchanged, you'll notice from top left is actually dated 1740. The description nonetheless changes. It's actually described as stone GP on the lower slide, though probably it would be better described stone GS for guide stone rather than guide post. Now, I think a possible reason for this is that milestones developed in late 17th century, and there were a few guideposts erected from then, but stone guide stones like this tend to be far more durable than wooden guideposts, and therefore a lot of the evidence tended to rot away. And I think it also accounts for guideposts probably being rather more transitory, day rate in the late 18th and well into the 19th century. It's difficult to find early illustrations of guideposts, partly because what I'm really interested in tends to be largely the pre-photographic age. Although photography was developed by Fox Talbot in the late 1830s and 1840s, rural photography, as opposed to portrait or set piece photography, tended to be somewhat delayed. And for illustration of guideposts, one is dependent very largely on line drawings. The two on the left here are taken from illustrations reproduced in William Albert's book on turnpike roads, which was published by Cambridge University Press back in 1972, but still remains a standard work on the subject of turnpike roads. And you can hardly help noticing that the two guideposts shown here are both rather twisty and a gimcrack. And the one bottom left here is even more so compared with the coach, which is on the left, which I've cropped out of the illustration. The next one, along with the slightly sinister looking figure, accompanies the illustration, I think, by George Cruikshank to Richard Barham's Inglesby Legends, published in the 1840s, and guidepost features there in the Ballad of a Ghostly Drummer on Salisbury Plain, as you might infer from the distances. The two illustrations on the right are from Dickens' Martin Chuzzlewit, and in fact it shows the same guidepost, though I suspect that Havelock Cray Brown, otherwise known as Fizz, who was the illustrator of this book, either wasn't too bothered about consistency or didn't bother to look back at the illustrations which he supplied, because you'll notice that on the left, one of the arms of the guidepost is missing, and on the right, it appears to have been restored. Bearing in mind, we seem to be looking at the coach from much the same angle. And there is the quote that about Mr. Pecksniff, some people liken him to direction post, and notice the terminology, which is always telling the way to a place and never goes there. Further illustrations were by the chap bottom right, who is John Leach, 1817 to 1864, who illustrated 4 of the novels by Robert Smith Surtees, of Jorrocks celebrity. I've laid some emphasis on this because partly because I have the novels in their original with these Leech illustrations, and they tend to show slightly not quite straight guides posts, but it does raise the question whether this is slightly artistic license. This is particularly the case with the champagne bottle smoking cigar, which is going along here. You'll also notice that the guidepost rather lends itself to the title letter of a character, sorry, of a chapter, bottom left, and this one right of centre up here, where it forms a capital T. The one on the right is not actually from a Surtees novel. It's from a cartoon which appeared in Punch, I think, in the late 1850s. The one on the top left, or two of them, one of them enlarged, is interesting in it actually includes a distance, whereas the other legible one simply says to somewhere. And if we go back to the Crookshank one here, it just has points to places. It doesn't actually give distances. And I think there could be something slightly significant in this. The Ordnance Survey 1-inch old series map generally did not record guideposts amongst its otherwise numerous virtues. The only exception I know of is this one near outside, well, what was outside Southampton in the early 1800s and is now well inside it. If you look on the left, you'll see it's indicated by a little cross symbol here. It's shown in rather wider context on the colour enhanced map in the middle, and map here shows that already by the late 1930s it was being encroached on by Southampton suburbia. Showing it on a modern map is a little difficult because it straddles right on the junction between sheets 196 and 185 of the 1 to 50,000 series. It may be that this was a well-known landmark near Southampton. It may be that guideposts were generally still rather unusual things at this time, and therefore the surveyor thought it worth noting them. I said that early photographs were rather elusive. There is one here which appeared in a guidebook for the Reigate area published in 1885 and was presumably taken a year or two earlier at Lye. In this case, we can probably identify the G post, which appears in the centre of the bottom left extract here, with what appears in the photo here, or at any rate something very closely resembling it. And by the look of it, as far as one can see, from rather smudgy illustration done by something called the ink photo process, which appears to be quite as much ink as photo. There don't seem to be actual distances on the post. It just seems to be lettering. I referred earlier to the question of showing distances on guideposts. Here is the Berwickshire guidepost from the copy on the NLS website, where you can see that there are 3 distances shown to Duns, Berwick and Coldstream. A peculiarity of mapping of the 6-inch and presumably 1 to 2500 mapping of the area southeast to Bredhill in Surrey is the showing of a guidepost with distances, which even managed to get itself by the late 1880s onto the 1-inch map, as you can see from the specimen bottom right. Sorry, go back. Top right, you can see repeated the Leech's illustration of the guidepost with distances. In the Berwickshire and Surrey example makes me think that...
Oh, shut up!
The Berwickshire and Surrey examples make me think that guideposts with distances were exceptional rather than the rule at this time. And if we go back briefly to the Lye one, I suggested that my reading of the smudges there are that there are no distances. And it may be that in the area around Redhill in the late 1860s, there were guideposts with distances were so rare that it was worth recording them. Incidentally, Horsley should read as Hawley, something which was never corrected. When I came to Devon in 1991, I came with a bicycle and cycled round and took photos of quite a number of guideposts, which you can see here. Three of them are certainly the ones centre left, bottom left, and bottom right are certainly still very much there. They're composed of cast iron and fairly substantial, though the one bottom left is largely obscured by the vegetation having grown up around it, so it appears rather less dignified now than it did then. The other ones are either as top right, top left, a metal post with wooden arms, or they are entirely of wood. You'll see that there are various designs. The one which is bottom centre left here at Willsworthy is a modern Devon County Council design, which is quite common and is actually made of metal and is therefore quite durable. The one up here with rather fancy brackets is all wood, and so I think is the one top right, and certainly is this one centre left here. Now, I referred earlier to the problems of durability of wood, and it does tend to rot, and as I think this may account for fluctuations in the guidepost population as recorded by the Ordnance Survey. On the left is what is actually the same guidepost in spirit, if not in actuality, at a road junction north of Exeter. The top left was photographed in 1991. Bottom left was photographed about 4 months ago. And you'll see that the top left one, which is a quite distinguished looking all wood one, was replaced later by a standard Devon County Council one. There's an example of a wooden post seem to be quite common for marking footpaths, and there's an example here on the way up to Dunkery Beacon, right of top centre, which I photographed in 2007. Bottom left of centre is an example which my wife and I encountered near Lavenham in Suffolk when we were up there a couple of months ago, and it was actually lying down, and you can see from the enlargement that it's got quite badly rotted at the bottom. Top right are two Lincolnshire examples. The one here with the bicycle leaning against it was photographed in 1998, and the picture below was taken in when I next passed there about 4 years later in 2002. The 1998, both 1998 and 2002, rather interesting, replicate the text. So we have one road has distances and another road branching off doesn't. And there's also a arm pointing to a bridleway here, which actually has a public rights of way type notice in the upper illustration, which was evidently certainly not in camera in 2002 in the lower one, which that sort of thing tends to be more exceptional than the rule. Top right is an example I photographed south of Lincoln in September, October 1994. As you see, it looks in rather a parlous state, and I did wonder whether it would survive the winter. However, our society's secretary happens to live not that far away, and I prevailed on him to go out and see what was there. And bottom right was photographed no more than a fortnight or 3 weeks ago, and as you can see, the cast iron column has been preserved, but the arms have been renewed. Cast iron posts were favoured in some counties quite extensively, and one reason why, for example, in Cornwall, there are a lot of late 19th, early 20th century guideposts, because they're cast iron and therefore durable. This rather repeats the point in more detail. The sign bottom right is a Northamptonshire example for a footpath. It's rather more typical of footpath signs, and it's coloured green and is independent of indicating any road distances. To ascertain what the position was with guidepost populations and whether the tendency between before 1888 and after 1888 for county councils to provide guideposts where there have been none before, as well as renewing ones where there have been, I carried out a survey of an area around about 120 square miles around Exeter in July and August of this year, and what follows is part of the result of this. Broadly, it showed that the tendency to install guideposts had continued after the last complete county series revision of the area in about 1904, and there were significantly more guideposts on the ground 119 years later than there had been in 1904, and in 1904 there was significantly more than there had been in the later 1880s. I did most of the trip by most of it by cycle, though a couple of traverses were done from a bus, and it took me the equivalent of about 6 full days to cover the area. On the left is a standard Devon County Council guidepost, which is in fact metal, though it has an attribution to wood. The top is a very unusual example because the distance to Tuckmill Farm is given 3/16 of a mile, and also adds that it's a private road, although it has otherwise the look of being a standard Devon post, though perhaps the lack of the County Council's logo on the pyramid is a giveaway. Bottom right is a case where there are actually 2 finger posts pointing to a destination, and top right are modern boards, which I count as guideposts because they are substitutes for them at junctions. In defining junctions, broadly junctions which existed in 1914 or so, as a result of which I didn't have to engage in a good deal of rather unpleasant work recording them at the numerous motorway junctions around Exeter. Occasionally there are examples where one gets both boards and fingers. This is at Ellerhays, which is a bit to the north of Exeter, where you'll observe boards rather out of focus on the left and the finger post on the right. Though you'll also notice that the finger post only points to 2 destinations. In practice, Silverstone is actually swinging around to the left rather than as you might immediately infer straight on. The other point is that the guidepost is edge blue, and I think if the edge blue in Devon, it indicates you're on C roads, on D roads, and if you're edged brown, indicates you're on C roads. However, the numbers of these aren't publicised. This is purely an inference, but plotting them on a map where these posts were rather suggested that was the answer. Most of the posts I recorded were reasonably modern ones, usually either the boards or the Devon County Council sort. Here are most of the 9 or 10 remaining vintage pre-1970s posts. Two of the photos are actually 1991 photos. You'll perhaps recognise from earlier group of pictures the one at Kenford, top left, which has now got overgrown. The example centre top right is another vintage one, which has got rather seriously overgrown, and also the one top right is not performing all its functions. In practice, all four arms are there, but they're not very legible. The example bottom right has cast into it the numbers of the A376, which was rather unfortunate, as the road was later downgraded to a B road. So the A road parts have been painted black, and the rest of it is left white as its makers intended. Incidentally, the A38 sign top left is rather odd in that it hasn't actually been on the A38 since whenever Kenford was bypassed, probably in about 1933 or thereabouts. But whether it's a pre-1933 sign or a slightly later one, I don't know. It may be that there was a little bit of artistic license. It may not be. The other point to say is that the sans serif lettering on these looks distinctly more rather than less recent. And I think all these signs date from after 1920 or so, and quite a number of this one certainly top left of centre, top right, the two bottom left, I think are very distinctly, I suspect, post-war ones, but hadn't been replaced. They do show a small degree of grouping because there are quite a number of them in Broadcliffe parish. I recorded my observations in Devon in a table, and these are the abbreviations which I used, classifications. The numbers of arms or brackets for arms seem to me worth recording, because a number of guideposts at crossroads where the four roads going off only point to 3 or even 2 directions. I originally counted the pyramid type as 2 different sorts, with or without pyramid, but then investigation of several ones lacking a pyramid on top suggested the pyramid had fallen off. So I've categorized as the pyramid type numbers which in practice lack their pyramids. And this is the beginnings of the table, which for some reason has got coloured up when I converted it from words to PowerPoint, and gives the junction names, whether they're shown on the 6-inch first, second or third editions. There's nothing shown on the third edition here because it only covered a fairly limited part of the area. There's the description of what there was in 2023, and you can see from here that there are quite a number which are of the pyramid type. Killerton South Junction E3, I'll just nip back quickly, and that's the one to left centre here with the various rather more recent signs for Killerton House and Garden, which I counted as a finger post rather than as boards. X means that there is no guidepost there, and I also noticed where the routes were edged blue, as you can see here at Station Cross, which in practice is in Forberton, right on the north edge of the area. The area here, as with most of my studies, was defined by the limits of OS 6-inch sheets. And this is a plot of the actual distribution of guideposts in the area to the east of an area to east of Exeter, with junctions without guideposts shown in black and those with in red, and occasionally seems to be a bit of a mistake with this, with 8-figure national grid references for each junction, and the type of it indicated in blue. I also plotted these at 1-inch scale. The base map for this is rather poor because it's about a third or fourth generation copy from the original, but you can see the system of arrows pointing in various directions according to whether there are guideposts shown on the first or second editions of the 6-inch. If neither are shown, then there is no symbol, and it produces slightly rather interesting patterns, notably the fact that in Broadcliff Village, for example, here right in the middle, there is apparently no sign. There still isn't one today, whereas the relatively minor road going off here just to the east, there is one. There's a whole thicket of them here at Barrow, where there is still a vintage signpost, and further thickets of them on this side. And the reason why we have these distributions, something to be explored. It can be seen also that there are quite a number along the main road from Exeter to Tiverton here, top right, but only provided after 1888, probably by the County Council in the 1890s, I suspect. There also they appear in some quantity along what was lastly the A30 here going past Rockbere. There are oddities in County Series depiction of guideposts, and we come back to the Wold Newton post, which I used as a title slide, which is conspicuously absent from the survey for the 1-2500 first edition in 1887, but is certainly present in 1905, though in 1905 it's on the opposite side of the road from where it was in 1984. Quite what the explanation of this is, and whether it was temporarily away for repair or whatever in 1887, is something we may never know. I'm inclined to think that it's early on the basis of the presentation of the names, because Thoresby in practice is North Thoresby and Raisin is Market Raisin, and these seem to be rather familiar local references rather than those of somebody sitting in office in Lincoln ordering guideposts. It was a remarkable survival, which unfortunately just disappeared shortly after I photoed this in 1984. As well as guideposts for roads, there are also guideposts for paths, of which there are a small selection of photos here. Top left you've already seen is in Northamptonshire. Bottom left, the actual sign is above the rather more conspicuous pointing to paradise, and is a fairly standard local authority public footpath sign. The Peak Northern Footpath Society have erected quite a number of these, though in this case they're more nature notice boards than actual guideposts. And there's a Devon example top right. Bottom right shows that these were being mapped by the Ordnance Survey. If you look along Selsdon Road here, running top left down to bottom right, you'll see there are 3 examples of such guideposts shown. And this shows them, they're actually to be seen over here on the left-hand side at, in the Crowhurst area. And this shows that on the east side of Croydon, there were quite a number of these. This is, in fact, a composite map with road guideposts indicated in red and path ones in blue. And it'll be seen there are no path ones on the first edition map, and I've encountered very little in the way of non-road ones on first edition maps, but thereafter they tended to develop, and there were particularly large numbers in the southern parts of the parish of Coulsdon, as you could see here. The path ones are shown in green with whether they're on the second, third, or fourth edition, indicated by the arrows, and they greatly outnumbered the posts for roads. However, having looked in some other areas, these do seem to have been very much a matter of local initiative. I did wonder whether there were large numbers of these things, path signs, being shown in areas which had active footpath societies of the sort who produced maps of public rights of way, or assumed public rights of way, in the early 1900s. There's a Watford example produced by Stanford, which went into at least 3 editions between 1902 and 1950, and adjoining one of the Barnet area, Barnet towards London Colney, and the Wirral examples, of which I've got examples, but there is no evidence whatever from the 6-inch mapping revised around 1910 that these footpath societies had any influence on the erecting of signs in these areas. There is a bald footpath signs as most of the other areas I looked at. I've included this as a bit of a joke. It shows Albury, not far from Guildford in Surrey, and I think it indicates one. This is printed with Christmas greetings, although it appears to be photographed in high summer, unless there was more global warming than we hitherto assumed in the 1900s. It's really included because of the early road warning sign here on the bottom right. And I think that the decline in the OS's depiction of guideposts, with footpath ones being excluded after 1963 and the whole lot after 2002, was because they're regarded as being cognate with traffic signs. I'm going to round off by consideration of the mystery of the Fife guideposts, which will be familiar to some of you, and which were the subject of an article by our member Michael Spencer in the Milestone Society's journal about 3 years ago. You'll see that this particular example is at Croyle or Crail, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, in the East Neuk of Fife. And as you see, it indicates almost exhaustively the directions of places, the road fork north of the town, and quite a lot, although, for example, King's Barnes, which is fourth down on the right, is quite a substantial settlement, and Coupar, bottom left, certainly is. Some of the others are actually very minor settlements, and the question's been raised exactly what the date of it is. It's not helped by the fact that a couple of them bear the name of an iron founder who moved from an iron founder, what I think in let me just check something. An iron founder, I didn't notice it was in one town in Fife and moved in 1855, and then moved to another one. And the 2 examples which have his name on them have his pre-1855 address. However, on the basis of the lettering, I think these must be very much later, probably 1880s or 1890s. And I think this is also confirmed by the Ordnance Survey mapping of these. I've marked this is the 1-inch mapping of the 1850s of East Fife with the guideposts superimposed, and the ones of the distinctive Fife pattern, unique to Fife, are shown by black edged in orange, as you can see here. And there are 4 of them appear in the area of this, and you'll observe the Croyle one was certainly there by 1893, as was one bottom left here, and 2 more had only appeared by 1911. It may well, now we all know, I hope, that the map gets out of date as soon as the surveyor leaves the ground. It may well be the other 2 also date from the 1890s. but I'm inclined to think that these are an innovation of the 1890s, though there's still the problem of the founder's name to be explained away, which hasn't been done satisfactorily. Well, that's it for this session. Thank you for being here. And also, I apologise for those of you who may think some of the slides seem slightly familiar. Of course, you did indeed see them a couple of years ago when I did a talk on milestones and other wayfinding things and maps. Questions?
Well, thank you very much, Richard. That's wonderful. What an in-depth exploration of it all, and repeat on not some of it was twice as interesting for that. I wonder if I can kick off with a thought that your mapping of the mileposts and stones, etc., clearly, as you said, I think clearly reflects local interest, like parish control, but I wonder who really controlled the budgets for signs over those different periods. It must have changed and changed again. And the other thing that struck me looking at some of the more recent ones is, did they all get replaced after the World War II removal and cover up? And I wonder if they were all correct as well.
I think quite a lot of them were simply put into store during the war and then re-erected afterwards. It's an interesting point because there are some counties, particularly the Lindsey division of Lincolnshire and Nottinghamshire, where mile posts, cast iron mile posts, which were certainly quite numerous in the early 20th century, practically vanish after World War II. And I think the reason probably was that they were removed during World War II and sent for scrap. Whereas guideposts at road junctions are evidently thought to be rather more useful and were simply put into store. And I have seen photos of these things stacked up in store, ready to be reinstated.
I remember seeing that. So it's an interesting thing that wood outlasted metal probably after World War II.
Not
Maybe
sure about that.
Maybe not. Rob's got his hand up. Rob, take it away. You got a question?
Yes. It's something in the nature of an observation rather than a question. I recall from the mid-1960s, if one went out on the Gartrey Way, the old Roman road going southeast from Leicester, there was one point at which, at a junction of what were effectively bridle roads, certainly untarred roads, there was an absolutely standard road signpost. And I had always supposed that the nature of the roads was such that because they were public highways, the county council took the view that this required a road post and not a path post. I've been looking for it on Ordnance Survey maps just now without success. I can't believe my recollection is faulty.
It depends what maps you were looking on, of course. Because that part of Leicestershire probably wasn't revised for the county series after 1914. So any guidepost which you find on the 1 to 25,000 provisional edition first series map won't be any more reliable than was there in 1914. By the same token, if there wasn't one there in 1914, but it was installed after the war, then it won't be recorded there either.
I was looking on 25-inch sheets of about 1929, which on the NLS website.
No, that's interesting. The other point is that there are still a number of posts up which point to distinctly untarred roads. There is Danby Beacon in on the North York Moors, where a road branches off, which certainly when we were up there about 15 months ago, still had a cast iron post. Still had a cast iron post, which pointed down the untarred road, which runs for about 3 miles to Glaisdale. It may be that there was some policy of tarring such roads in, let's say, the 1920s or 30s, which was subsequently reversed. It is something which isn't, as far as I'm aware, very much studied the actual spread of road tarring. But if you compare early 1-inch 7th series sheets being revised in the early 50s with their successors in 1960s, or 150,000 sheets being revised in the late 70s, early 80s, you can still see that some roads were still being tarred for the first time, apparently, after World War II. But it's certainly an interesting point that you're pretty certain these standard road posts are there on the ground, but they weren't on the map. It would be interesting to know what the design of these posts were.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for your question, Rob. Mike Cottrell asks in chat, do you have any information on metal signposts having been stolen? I only ask as it seems to me there is quite a lot of valuable scrap metal unattended in the countryside.
I think the Wold Newton post, which appears on my title slide, and again later on is thought to have been thieved. Whether other posts have disappeared for that reason, I don't know. Certainly there have been attempts at thieving mile posts, though usually by souvenir hunters trying to sell them on later rather than as scrap.
Certainly with milestones. We're both in the Milestone Society, which I recommend to those present today. And it seems to be prevalent in some parts of the world. Strangely, law-abiding Norfolk, where a number of stones and or other markers, I don't know, Richard, have been nicked of late. Any more questions for Richard? I'd like to ask one while you think. Richard, you showed some guide stones early on in your presentation, and they both had, I think Penistone was the one on the top, and it had R with a number M. What does that stand for? I can't remember.
I will...
road miles? Route miles?
No, it's maybe abbreviations for places.
Well, they all had R and M on them, but the numbers were different. Rob's shaking his head. You got any clues, Rob?
Hang on, let me get the slide up.
Yes, the figure was between the R and the M.
Yeah. Were they all standard mileage, I wonder? Brian Higgins, I like your comment. Would that be normal for Norfolk? No, that's doctor speak.
Oh, there we go. Raised hand. There we go.
No, I'm afraid it's a photo which I happen to have in stock and therefore used, but I don't know the detailed explanation.
Was that Graham Steele asking?
Yes. The two questions. One is it guidepost or finger post? And the other one is, how about so many of the guideposts for West Yorkshire which give the OS grid reference on them?
Yeah, the grid reference ones were of necessity all post-war. Quite a lot of them have disappeared, but by the time that it was realised that these were a bit distinctive, they were beginning to be conserved. I deliberately left those out of this talk because none of them will appear on county series mapping. Yes, I'm certainly very much aware of these ones with grid references. The grid reference thought considerably more of them survive in Dorset, and apparently there are also a few in Radnorshire, but I'm not aware that there were any others, or none others have been reported. But
and how about guidepost or finger post?
Quite a lot of people just call them signposts. The Ordnance Survey insists upon calling them guideposts. Rather interestingly, there's somewhere in Dickens, it may be in Martin Chuzzlewit, where Dickens uses the phrase signpost, and he means actually the signboard outside an inn.
Oh. I was just an adjunct to the mileage we were talking about. It was a standard, what do we call it, a mile used? I can't think of the word.
Statute.
A statute English mile used. And how did they do it, I wonder? Did they use a wheel in the old days?
This comes back to this question of distances on posts, and I have a suspicion that a lot of distances only began to appear on mile posts after about 1890 with the ready availability of Ordnance Survey large-scale mapping. Because if you're going to provide distances to various villages, you have to measure them somehow. And as you say, you can measure them with a wheel or a chain on the ground. It's a damn sight easier to measure them sitting in your office with a piece of string or something else. And I think that that probably explains the rise of mileages. Some mileages could have been supplied from distances along turnpike roads, which had to be supplied with milestones by legislation of 1773, or certainly mile markers, which would have provided the information ready-made. But away from turnpike roads, one would have had to engage in measurement. And I suspect this was only being done after 1888, 1890, when the county councils come into play.
Yes, I suppose I was thinking of turnpikes and milestones.
Yeah.
Question. Any more questions for Richard? Shout or raise your electronic hand or unmute and speak. No, well, I think that's it. You've covered it all so thoroughly, and a fantastic amount of mapping there. Thank you very much indeed, Richard. It was a broad-ranging subject, and we had up to 50 members and guests attending. So very successful. This will be recorded and it has been recorded and will be put on the website. There's a late message flashed up here from Alan Drain. There are 1,120 guideposts listed by Historic England generally, grade 2. That's a lot, isn't it?
It is quite a lot, though once you begin to average them out bearing in mind that my 120 odd square miles around Exeter included 536 junctions, the actual number of junctions with a listed guidepost reduces somewhat.
Yes. Since we've got our Dutch member here, Michiel Rademakers, Michiel, is Holland a similar position, or the Netherlands generally?
We
Do you have a lot of signposts?
The signposts in Holland are managed by the original bicyclist organization, the ANWB. And they have evolved into the National Signpost Authority.
Oh, right.
Originally, they were signposts for bicyclists.
Well. Dank u wel.
Alsjeblieft.
And Richard, thank you very much once again, and congratulations on those knees.
I will be publishing a version of this in sheet lines in due course.
Right, that's splendid. Thank you for your message, Mike Cottrell, who's lost his voice, either for real, I hope not, or electronically. Bad luck. But thank you all very much. And a reminder that on January the 23rd, our next talk will be online and will be Rob Wheeler on those late 18th century Kent surveys. I hope too, for those of you in London and the Southeast, to have another live show and tell meeting early in the new year. I can't pin it down to February or March yet, because of other pressures, but we'll be announcing that certainly in the new year as early as possible. So all that remains me to say is thank you for coming tonight. Thank you to our speaker and all the questioners, and have a very good Christmas. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Cheers, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you.